So, I wasn't really planning on doing a full review of Pokemon Sword and Shield, but I figured since I just beat the game and it's still relatively fresh in people's minds, I might as well throw my 2 cents out there. One thing you should know about me right out of the gate is the fact that I have a lot of experience with toxic fandoms. For example, I grew up with the Star Wars prequels, and I got into my favorite series of all time, Final Fantasy, right around the time 13 released. But of all the fandoms that I've been in, Pokemon's is the one that I've seen the most infighting within. And leading up to the game's release, and even continuing on today, I've seen a lot of people bashing and defending this game left and right, and I just want to throw my opinion out there. It's time for us to get into the meat of things with my opinion on the most contested game in the entire series to this day, Pokemon Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield take place in the Galar region, which is basically the Pokemon equivalent of England. Just like the other games, your goal is to become the Pokemon champion by going around the region, collecting the 8 gym badges from the different gym leaders, and eventually taking on the champion. Along the way, you have to contend with a few rival Pokemon trainers, including your childhood friend, Hop, the stuck-up, self-obsessed brat, Bade, and a girl named Marnie, who has a loud and obnoxious group of fans called Team Yell, who are intent on sabotaging all the other competitors to make sure that their girl becomes the next champion. Along the way, you help your friend Sonia unravel some of the mysteries about the history and mythology of the Galar region, and in the end, solve a crisis that may tear apart the Galar region as we know it. The first bit of praise I'll offer this game is the fact that it has one of the best supporting casts in the entire series. Hop is a likable enough character who undergoes a lot of growth and change as the game progresses. Bade is a smug son of a gun, the likes of which we haven't seen from the series in years, who also actually has a pretty interesting personal journey and an interesting spot he ends up by the end. And Marnie exists. Okay, that's a bit harsh. I don't hate her, I quite like her actually, but out of all the rival characters, she's probably the least interesting. And then there's Team Yell. Now, when these guys were first revealed, I thought that they were just going to end up being a weaker, less interesting version of Team Skull from Pokemon Sun and Moon. But, much to my surprise, I was completely right. And I don't mean that in just the sense that they fill the same role in the narrative that Team Skull did, but they are just not interesting. They aren't even good at being obstacles in your journey, instead mostly functioning as comic relief. Although I will give them the pass because they're not really meant to be villains. Actually, what's unique about this game is that there really isn't a villain. Well, I mean, okay, there is kind of a villain, but he's genuinely altruistic and completely sincere throughout the entire game. It's just that he's a deeply flawed character whose actions have unintended consequences for those around him. Something else I appreciate about this game is the world building. I love the way Pokemon battles are portrayed as like some big televised sporting event where everyone wears uniforms with numbers on them, how you need an endorsement to participate, how most of the major fights are backed by a crowd of cheering fans. And there's also other details, like you can send your Pokemon out to complete various jobs people post on the Help Wanted ads, and it's kind of interesting to see how Pokemon are utilized in day-to-day existence outside of battling. Now, the storyline itself is decent, but at the same time, it suffers from a severe case of tell, don't show. Multiple times throughout the game, important plot points happen, but the main character is always told, don't worry about it, go off and keep worrying about the gym challenge, we adults will handle this. Now, on the one hand, I can appreciate the fact that in a Pokemon game, the adults are actually taking responsibility for once instead of entrusting the fate of the world to the 10-year-old who just got their Pokemon 2 days ago. But at the same time, whenever the game tells me that giant Pokemon are rampaging through the city, I kinda want to see it happening. On top of that, there are parts of the story that just feel kinda poorly written compared to previous games in the series. For example, early on in the game you obtain the Wishing Star. It's a plot-critical item that gives you the power to Dynamax your Pokemon, more on that later. And the method you obtain it in the game is just absolutely laughable compared to the way you obtain similar items in previous games. Let's compare, shall we? In Pokemon X and Y, you gain your Mega Bracelet by winning a ceremonial battle on top of the Tower of Mastery. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, you gain your first Z Crystal as a gift from the island's guardian deity, Tapu Koko. In this game, you obtain the Wishing Star when it just falls out of the sky and lands next to you. That is weak. However, I'll still give the story a pass on account of the interesting supporting cast and the lack of a true villain. Now let's move on to the gameplay. The main foundation of the game is more or less the same as other games in the series. You form a team of 6 Pokemon, each with different strengths, weaknesses, and abilities, and you fight against other Pokemon or Pokemon trainers in battles that use a rock-paper-scissors-like system for determining what moves are good against what. The main new mechanic that this game introduces is Dynamaxing. In certain battles, you can grow your Pokemon to a massive size for a set number of turns, and perform massive attacks that do a ton of damage. And this mechanic is not very good. All it really does is give you a lot more HP for a few turns and replace all of your moves with slightly more powerful moves of the same type. I only ever find it interesting to use it against another Dynamaxed Pokemon, because using it against a Pokemon that's normal size just feels mean. It just doesn't have the same pizzazz as Mega Evolutions that were introduced in X and Y. And yeah, it is nice that Dynamaxing can apply to any Pokemon, but it just isn't as fun. There is one part of the game where it's interesting though, and that's the max raids. In order to talk about those, I need to talk about the wild area. Now, the wild area is almost but not quite an open world section of the game. It connects certain parts of the Galar region together, and it is still pretty linear in where you can go at what time, but you can still freely explore it and find all sorts of random stuff lying around. You can catch all sorts of Pokemon depending on the time of day and the weather, well before they normally be available, and it's just really addictive to explore it. Now, I personally found myself revisiting the wild area almost every time I got a break from the normal story events. Since it's such a great way to level up and find new Pokemon and get new items, it's just really cool. This brings us to the max raids. Every so often you'll come across a Dynamaxed Pokemon that you can team up with a group of up to 4 players to take down and get a chance to catch. These Dynamaxed Pokemon usually have better stats and oftentimes brand new forms. It is a really, really cool idea, in theory. You see, you're ideally supposed to connect to the internet and connect with 3 other Pokemon trainers in order to take them down. However, if you can't do that, the game gives you the option of using AI-controlled computer players instead. However, in order to encourage the player to use the internet and connect to other people, the AI on these guys is so bad. Special mention goes to that one trainer who has a Wobbuffet that has no idea how to use one of them. I wouldn't mind so much, except A, I find it nearly impossible to get into other people's raids when they're looking for participants, and whenever I start a new raid, I have a very hard time getting people to join mine. Still, on the rare occasion when it actually works, it is absolutely amazing and fun and a great way to get items. One feature from this game that I really like is Pokemon Camp. Pokemon Camp lets you camp with your Pokemon.
Thank you, Lieutenant Obvious. Sir, it's Captain, sir.
And get more friendly with them by playing with toys with them, which humorously looks like they're kicking the crap out of you. And also by cooking curry using various ingredients you find throughout the adventure. The cooking minigame itself is really fun, and it's really adorable to just interact with your Pokemon and just chill out and see them do their thing. Overall, I really like Pokemon Camp. I think it's really fun compared to the befriending mechanics of the last couple games. And since we're talking about the gameplay, I guess I should talk about the Donphan in the room. I've been putting it off long enough. Yes, over 2/3 of the Pokemon introduced up to this point got cut for the release of this game. Now, I totally get why they did it. At this point, there's been almost 1,000 Pokemon created since day one, so introducing all of them into a single game would be a logistical nightmare. And honestly, the game's own arsenal of 400 Pokemon, including new ones, is nothing to sneeze at. It's just, some of the choices they made in the Pokemon to cut are just so baffling to me. For example, back in Generation 5 we were introduced to a Pokemon called Stoutland, which is based on the Scottish Terrier. So naturally, in a Pokemon game set in the equivalent of England, Stoutland is nowhere to be seen. In addition, you have some Pokemon that just feel redundant. They brought back Wingull and Pelipper, despite the fact that this game introduced a brand new Seagull-based Pokemon, Cramorant, which is honestly a million times better. Lilligant, one of my favorite Pokemon from Generation 5, got cut from the game, but its counterpart Whimsicott still made it somehow. And then you have the case of fan-favorite, classic, beloved Pokemon getting shafted in favor of ones no one cares about. I mean, yeah, it's a shame that we lost Alakazam, Marill, and Skarmory, but hey, at least we got Basculin! And Cherim. Did anyone ever use that thing? Does anyone even remember that thing? The gameplay isn't the only aspect of the overall package that I have problems with. This game also suffers visually. And no, I'm not one of the people who complains about the animation or the graphical fidelity as a whole. I think they're fine. What I'm mainly talking about is the draw distance. Sweet Arceus, the draw distance in this game is abysmal. Things will just pop in and out of existence like 20 feet away from you. Again, I wouldn't mind so much, but this is the same console that gave us Breath of the Wild. They have no excuse. And like most games in this series, it suffers from a pretty undercooked post-game. Now, I know I've been somewhat critical towards this game, and yeah, I don't think it's as good as the last major entries in the series, Sun and Moon. But in the end, despite its failings, I think that this is a very fun game. Sure, its story and gameplay ideas aren't as fleshed out as they could have been, but in the end, it's a Pokemon RPG, and even at their worst, Pokemon games are still pretty fun. I know I've critiqued the story quite a bit through this review, but it's more character-driven than most of the other Pokemon games, and the characters are good. I'm disappointed at some of the cuts that they made to the Pokemon roster in this game, but most of the new ones that it introduces are good. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, even though they have quite a few problems, Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield are good. My final score is a 7 out of 10.